So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview, broadcast and recorded live on blogtalkradio.com from the new media and baseball capital of the world, go Rays, St. Petersburg, Florida. You Midwesterners may disagree, but I don't think there is a single place in this country more representative of the soul of America than Brooklyn or New Jersey. And the fact that I was born in the former and raised in the latter has nothing to do with coloring my thinking whatsoever. Sorry. Both are cultural, ethnic, and racial melting pots dating back to the earliest days of the original 13 colonies. But only one is featured as a world unto itself in a new book by my guest, Peter Golenbock. In the country of Brooklyn is a remarkable trip through the history of one of the United States' most vital geographic regions, one that has contributed to our nation in the fields of politics, culture, society, and, well, pretty much anything else that counts. But that's not the only new book that Peter has hitting bookstores today. He also helped actor Tony Curtis produce his autobiography, titled American Prince, a Memoir, and that is also out there today. 2 books published on the same day. Not bad at all. This is Peter's second visit to Mr. Media. He was my guest in early 2007 when he published the controversial book 7, the Mickey Mantle Novel. He's also someone I consider a friend. Peter, welcome back to Mr. Media.
Well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
How are you today?
I'm Cloud 9.
2 books, The Rays, what is it?
2 books, The Rays? Yeah, sure.
that would be enough for most people.
What could be bad? A beautiful day in St. Petersburg? Absolutely.
I guess I should have pointed out that, like myself, Peter is based in St. Petersburg, and I'm kind of surprised that you're not in Boston, frankly.
I am putting the final edits on my book, George, the little rich boy who built the Yankee Empire. I've got until Friday to finish doing that, and so I am sitting here during the day at my desk editing away.
I see. Well, that's a good excuse for not being at Fenway Park today.
Sure.
I'll buy that.
Okay.
Well, let's come back to George a little later.
All right.
And start with In the Country of Brooklyn. Now, this feels like a labor of love.
Well, they're all labor of love, but this was one of those books that sort of started with one sentence of an idea. On every April 15th, it's Jackie Robinson Day in Major League Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And I had done the book Bums, where I interviewed Rachel Robinson and all the Dodgers who played with Jackie. And my uncle had been Jackie's lawyer, so I met Jackie when I was 10 years old, after the 4th game of the 1956 World Series. And so I had met the man and was just awestruck by him. And after Bud Selig announced that April 15th was going to be Jackie Robinson Day every single year, I sort of thought to myself, I said, why was it that the people in Brooklyn loved Jackie Robinson? Because I've got a lot of friends who are former Brooklyn Dodger fans, and to a man, they adored Jackie Robinson. And he came up in 1947 in an era when the country was segregated, and I mean everywhere in the country, run by these Jim Crow rules. And so he was beloved in Brooklyn, but he was absolutely hated everywhere else in the country. He was doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing, which was playing sports, playing something, anything with whites. And he was reviled for that all over the country, but not in Brooklyn. And so my question to myself was, why?
Yeah.
And this book is a response to that one question.
Really? So it all came from that?
Yeah, it all came from that. Exactly.
Now, and Peter, am I wrong? I mean, I call this a labor of love, and I understand, that when you work on a book, it is forever your child. But this one seemed a little more special than some of the other special ones. Well,
it's an opportunity to, in a sense, rewrite history. because very often, history is written by the winners.
Right.
And so, people like, like Joseph McCarthy, people like A. Mitchell Palmer, the Red Scare people, J. Edgar Hoover, all those people, when they went after the so-called, liberals or communists or, whoever it was they were going after. If you look at the, real history of it all, what they were doing was incredibly unconstitutional. And what the people who were victims of this were doing basically was trying to bring civil rights to the country. They were union activists. They were civil rights workers. These were people who were for the working class having better working conditions. That's what these people were guilty of. Whereas the people who were attacking them and putting them in jail were accusing them of, overthrowing the country, which was a bunch of nonsense, it turned out. And so I interviewed a lot of victims at the beginning of this book, people who were thrown out of their teaching jobs. Henry Foner and his three brothers, for instance, were thrown out of their teaching jobs. He was a fabulous, fabulous high school teacher. And they went after him because, basically what they would do is they would say, "Are you a member of the Communist Party?" And most of these people weren't, but they were so offended that they were asked the question, because it was an unconstitutional question in their mind, that they refused to answer. And by refusing to answer, that was enough to get them fired from their jobs. And this happened to, thousands of people. And so in my book, in this book, these people are the heroes, and the J. Edgar Hoovers and the A. Mitchell Palmers and the Joseph McCarthys are the villains.
Now, most people know you for writing about baseball, and so it's not too surprising that this book got its start from a baseball theme, Jackie Robinson. But
Right.
You become more of a crusading journalist in this book. You go way beyond Jackie.
That's true. I've always been a crusading journalist in a way. If you've looked at a lot of my sports books, civil rights have always played a very important role in it. That's something that I've always found absolutely fascinating. Interviewing the black ball players in any of my books, my Cardinal books, my Cubs books, Red Sox books. Talking about Pupsy Green and how he was the last, the Red Sox were the last team to bring blacks to the major leagues. And because of that racism, the Red Sox were a terrible team for so many years. Civil rights plays a role in all of these teams as such. But this is the first book that really gave me an opportunity to talk about civil rights and unionism and that sort of thing at great length.
And you worked on this book, I think, over a longer period of time than maybe some of the other books.
No, about a year and 2 or 3 months. Not too much longer than the others. And the reason for that is that I have a professor friend of mine, a man by the name of Joseph Doranson. He works at LIU in Brooklyn. And I had gone to one of his seminars. The seminar was about Jackie Robinson. And, when I set out to do this book, the first person I called was Joe. And I said, I need, this is what I'm trying to find. Do you have people? Do you know people who would be perfect for me to interview? And I knew he had some, because at that seminar there were a few of them who were there, and I listened to them, and I was fascinated. So he provided me with a list of 8 or 9 absolutely fascinating people who are in, the first part of this book. He provided me with the entree, and they were all just so, unbelievably fascinating. One fellow, Stan Cantor, whose father disappeared one day.
Yeah, that was a great story. Yeah.
Yeah, he disappeared because he thought the FBI was after him, was going to throw him in jail. And so he was on the run basically for 3 years until the whole McCarthy thing kind of went away, and then he came back. But what people don't realize is newspaper article is one thing, but but the effect of this sort of thing on families and on real people is huge, and that's what I'm trying to describe in this book in part.
The style and the tone of the book, I don't know if pastiche is quite the right word, but it feels
I don't know what that means. I don't. What's a pastiche?
Well, maybe a better word that I'm thinking of. Maybe it's patchwork. Maybe is closer. There's in the sense that it combines both narrative style and oral history. It's a little bit. It's a little different in the way it's. Why did you do it in kind of that mixed way as opposed to going with one or the other?
Well, I've always been a rebel. I always like to do things differently. I mean, that's just my nature.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've seen any of my oral histories, Bums or Wrigleyville or Spirit of St. Louis or Fenway, my attitude always is that I, as the writer, is not, what's terribly important to this book, but what's important are the people I interviewed. What's important is what the stories that these people bring, to the book. And always I want to put the people I interview at the forefront. I mean, I think that's very, very important. And that's, I'm very happy to say it's something I've done, with great care in this particular book.
But the decision to meld the two styles, was that, did you have to think about that? Is that the way you started out when you started on the book, or did any of that kind of change?
Well, the first couple of chapters, they occurred, prior to people being alive.
Right.
The first chapter was about the founding of Coney Island back in 16, who knows what, with Lady Deborah Moody, who I discovered. She had left England because of religious persecution and gone to, of all places, Salem, Massachusetts. And, Salem was no better than England. And so she ended up in Gravesend, which is now part of Brooklyn, in Coney Island, where she basically founded Brooklyn. I mean, this is a woman who founded Brooklyn, basically. And she was a very tolerant person, believed in religious tolerance, treated the Indians well. And then I discovered another guy by the name of John McCain, coincidentally enough. This guy was M-C-K-A-N-E, John Young McCain. And what John Young McCain did is he got himself elected to, the local council there. And, he was one of these guys who believed in no regulation of business, kind of like the guys in Washington today. And what he ended up doing was taking over the town. He became basically the czar of Coney Island. I mean, he was leasing public property and taking the rents, what he called rents, and putting them in his pocket. So he became a very, very rich man. He hired his own police department. And basically, he was the czar of Brooklyn. So you've got Lady Deborah, who was this very liberal person, and then you had this very conservative person, John Y. McCain, which were the two ends politically concerning the founding of Brooklyn. And I just found that fascinating. Now, obviously, I think McCain died like in 1896 or something like that. So there's nobody you can interview for that sort of thing. So with the first 2 or 3 chapters where you're not interviewing anybody, you're writing narrative. Once you start talking about the coming of the Jews, and how important the Jews are to Brooklyn, now I've got people I can interview about that. And so, you set up what it is you want to talk about, and then you interview the people who lived it. And hopefully, the people who lived it, who tell you what it was like to have lived it, you read these things and you're transported into a world that doesn't exist anymore. But for them, that was their lives, and I just found it fascinating.
I've always liked the oral history style. I mean, you mentioned Cantor, and I know that story, reading that story, and then later in the book, I was surprised. I was quite fascinated with Curtis Sliwa's tales from his early pre-Guardian Angels days. Up until now, yeah. I mean, for me, he always seemed like a cartoon character with his red cap, but I have a very different appreciation of him now.
Without a doubt. I mean, what I love so much about what I do, you know, you always have to write a proposal to sell the book to a publisher. Mm-hmm. But proposals, when you're writing nonfiction books, it's sort of your hopes and your dreams. I mean, until you actually interview the people who go into your book, you have no idea, you don't know what the words are going to be. You just don't know. And what I've always loved about what I do is the discoveries. You know, when you interview somebody like Curtis Sliwa and they end up being the most fascinating person you've ever interviewed, you know, that sort of thing.
Right.
You know, you're 3.5 hours later, you're sitting there and you're going, holy smokes, what a story. And then you have the opportunity to take that person's words and communicate that to everybody else. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do.
Do you have any other favorite characters from the book? People that you got to interview?
I've got so many favorite characters. You know, I mean, a friend of mine, John Ford. He plays baseball. He plays softball with me in St. Petersburg. He said to me one day, you know, my father jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge and lived. I said, get out of here. And he proceeded to show me a newspaper article from the New York Times back in, 1938 or something like that. By gosh, his father jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge and lived. And so I interviewed John for, 2 or 3 hours. And here's a guy, it was just fascinating. You know, his life, an Irish enclave in Brooklyn. And, you have to read it to get the details of it, but it's absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Another fellow, John Mackey, when he was like 6 years old, he had polio. And he had gone to Sister Kenny, and she had somehow cured him of his polio. And when he was interviewed, he told people that his favorite ball player was Billy Cox, who was the third baseman for the Brooklyn Dodgers. So Mackey ended up being this New York City street cop who actually I think his first day of duty was during the riots after Martin Luther King was killed, and he tells the story of what that was like. And then the other thing that he did, one day he decided he was going to go find Billy Cox. And this was when he was in his 30s, I guess. And he and his buddy get in the car and drive to Pennsylvania and track down Billy Cox. And it was just a wonderful story, the way he told it. I mean, the Brooklyn Dodgers are an important part of this. Mm-hmm. Ira Glasser, who was the head of the ACLU for, 28 years, something like that. Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous storyteller. He was a kid growing up in Brooklyn when Jackie Robinson started playing for the Dodgers. And he tells this story. He and his other lawyers, they started out as young lawyers, sitting around talking about what Jackie Robinson meant to them. And it turns out they all had the same story, which is that Jackie Robinson turned them all on to the importance of their work as civil rights workers. Mm-hmm. I mean, wow. It's just, it's something else. It really is. And these people went on. Braun Reinitz. She's a gal who loved Jackie Robinson and ended up going on freedom rides. And she talks about, Jackie's influence and the freedom ride that she went on, getting thrown in jail in the South. I mean, the reach of Jackie Robinson was great. He was truly, when you think about it, even before Martin Luther King, he was the guy who made it all possible. Because if he had failed as a ball player, who knows? I mean, the civil rights movement may have been set back 10 years. Mm-hmm. But it took Jackie maybe, 6 weeks to show everybody in Brooklyn that this guy was a superstar. Mm-hmm. And they loved him.
Well, folks, if you've got a question for writer Peter Golenbock, author of In the Country of Brooklyn, as well as Bums and Seven, the Mickey Mantle novel, and a whole lot more, give us a call, 646-595-3135. I'm thinking, the jumping off point for starting the book was Jackie Robinson, and there's certainly a baseball angle to it, but it goes way beyond that. I'm kind of wondering, I mean, if it was a straight baseball book, obviously we could define who the market is. I mean, when you do Wrigleyville, anyone who's ever lived through a Cubs game is probably in the market for that. Bums, same thing out of New York, but books that you've done out of Boston. Who is the market for this?
If you're a liberal, if you consider yourself a liberal, and you want to know why you should be proud that you are a liberal, this is the book for you. Short answer.
Okay. I actually thought you'd say anyone who had ever lived in Brooklyn would find this of interest.
Well, that's not too bad either. That works for me.
Happy to help, my friend.
You're welcome.
Now, I'm also guessing that this may be one of the longest books you've written, and pound for pound, perhaps the heaviest book.
No.
Really?
I've written heavier. Yeah. I think Amazing was probably heavier. The book I did on the University of Florida football team certainly was heavier. Yeah, I've written some doorstops in my life.
All right. Well, I guess I don't have enough of them in my collection yet.
Probably not. But the idea in this economy is to give you a bang for your buck. So you're not going to get shortchanged on this one.
No, there is plenty of book here.
There's another point. There's another point to this book. I might as well discuss it, and that has to do with immigration and immigrants. I start out talking about the Jews, and then certainly I talk about the Irish and the Italians. I even have a friend who was Muslim who grew up in Brooklyn, and I talk about him as well. I interviewed Pete Hamill, who talks so absolutely fascinatingly about the Irish. Joe Flaherty, the late Joe Flaherty, I had interviewed him about living in Windsor Terrace, and he was just wonderful, and he's in this book. Bruce Morrow is in this book. Neil Sedaka is in this book, because music also, in terms of civil rights, was very, very important. When the black musicians finally got airplay, first with Alan Freed in Cleveland, and then with Freed in New York, and then, of course, with Bruce Morrow in New York, that did a lot for the civil rights movement. Also to show whites how talented these black musicians and singers were. So that's an important part of this book as well. And as you get closer to the present, you see, for a long time, the Jews were tremendously supportive of the blacks. And that's a very important part of the story, and that's a large part of why Jackie was so popular, because the Jews saw his acceptance along with their own acceptance. And then as we go along, if you remember, there was a school crisis back in the 1960s where they wanted to have local school boards took over, and this one particular local school board was taken over by black militants. And they wanted to get rid of the Jewish teachers. And so you now have the beginning of discord between the blacks and the Jews for the first time. Something that escalated. Brooklyn was always changing. Things were always going on in that borough. Sociologically, in terms of the housing. One of the reasons why the Dodgers moved out, of course, is that a lot of blacks moved into the area near Ebbets Field, and Walter O'Malley, who was a racist, didn't want blacks filling his seats. He wanted to go somewhere where, he'd have white fans, and that was one of the reasons he moved out to Los Angeles and put his new stadium in a place where only people with cars could get. That was a racial thing.
Peter, is there any connection we can draw from this book and Jackie Robinson to today? Jackie Robinson obviously broke tremendous boundaries with baseball. Today we're on the verge, apparently, maybe, of electing our first black president. Do you?
Well,
it's
certainly the culmination. It's certainly the culmination of it. It certainly is the culmination of it. I mean, one of the people I interviewed for this book is a fellow by the name of Charles Barron, who was a New York City assemblyman, a wonderful, wonderful guy. He used to be a Black Panther, and he's now sitting, as one of the top officials of New York City. It's how the times have changed, and it's important for people to know that.
Do you understand that by associating with him, you will be tarred when you run for president?
I'd be proud to be tarred by being associated with him.
It's so bizarre to see how some people have tried to hit Obama's history, because it's 30 years after the 60s, had an event at this former weatherman's house, right? I mean,
right.
This guy's in Hyde Park in Chicago, and very upscale neighborhood where apparently he's been accepted by all of his neighbors, but because Obama was there once, here's
what you have to understand, and this is one of the things that the book points out, is that the white conservatives over the years would resort to just about anything to stop the minorities, be they the Jews or the blacks, the Catholics for a large part, from gaining in the society. I mean, it's a large part of why, in a lot of places it was no Irish need apply, Nina.
Right.
Or signs that says no Jews, blacks, or dogs.
St. Pete Beach.
St. Pete Beach, right.
Right.
Exactly right. I mean, this is no different from that. These are the white wasps who are standing against the tide, willing to do anything that they could possibly do, short of murder. The Nazis would practice murder. At least in this country, they don't practice murder, which is, that's a big step up. But basically do anything or say anything to keep, them, with parentheses, out. It's the same thing. It's what McCarthy did. It's what A. Mitchell Palmer did. It's what the racists did. It's what the anti-Semites did. And this is just a continuation of that same bad business.
Now, I mentioned in the introduction that I think Brooklyn and New Jersey share some of the same elements of being uniquely American. But another thing they have in common is that they are roundly derided by people who don't come from either place. Why is there such antagonism to people from Brooklyn, people from New Jersey, maybe even Boston to some degree?
I think, quite frankly, that most of that is anti-Semitism. Brooklyn is seen as a Jewish place for the most part, and the Jews are pushy, and the Jews, want civil rights, and the Jews want, fairness in the workplace. The Jews are the liberals who, were attacked for their beliefs. So many of them were thrown out of the teaching jobs because these white WASP conservatives did not want them teaching their kids. And I think that's the sort of, and maybe the entire city of New York, when the Republicans talk about, we're not like New York, I think that's a large part what they're talking about. How Sarah Palin can come in and talk about, oh, she's a small town girl. We're not like them.
Yeah.
Basically what she's saying is, we want all you whites to vote, for the white people, and, don't let them become president.
It's a pretty racist approach.
It's a straight-on racist approach, and why not? It's worked for so many years. The problem that the conservatives, Republicans have right now is that so many of our citizens are so far beyond racism that they're not susceptible to that message anymore. my son is going to be 21 years old, and there's not a racist bone in his body.
Mm-hmm.
He's got black friends, and I mean, when I say friends, I mean friends. I don't mean, like when we were kids, we would talk about our black friends, but they weren't really friends. They were, people we played basketball with, or because we lived on the white side of town in Connecticut, and they lived on the black side, and you never saw them. But that was in 1955. It's different today.
Mm-hmm.
Obama's going to have such an outpouring of young people voting for him that I would be surprised, very much surprised, if the Republicans won more than 6 states.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. I mean, times have changed.
Yeah. Do you think, coming back to what I was saying about Brooklyn and New Jersey, though, mostly Brooklyn we're focusing on.
We go back to New Jersey. I can tell you what they don't like about New Jersey. You drive down the New Jersey Turnpike, and you've got all those oil refineries, and it smells like the son of a gun, and that's what most people see. They leave the George Washington Bridge heading south to Philadelphia, and basically they see the oil refineries from New Jersey on the way south. And it's not a pretty sight. I mean, most people do not get to see. I lived in Englewood for 5 years, beautiful, beautiful town. And if you head west, towards Pennsylvania, there's wonderful, beautiful cities out that, not cities, but towns out that way. Country, just a beautiful place to live. Mm. But most people don't see that. What they see is the turnpike, and they see the oil refineries.
Well, what I was going to ask you is, do you think, in thinking of like Brooklyn or New Jersey, do you think that we as writers sometimes romanticize the places of our origins too much?
Too much?
Yeah.
No, I don't. See, I didn't grow up in Brooklyn, so I'm not romanticizing anything. I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. I never went to Ebbets Field. That's the one regret I have. I never got to see what Ebbets Field looked like. The World Series game I went to was at Yankee Stadium that day. So, what I'm trying to do, or what I hopefully have done, is resurrected a world from the people who are able to tell me what their lives are like. Not my life, their lives.
Okay.
That's the trick.
Got it. And do you now, having said that, can you name something about Brooklyn that is overrated?
Well, that's overrated. Well, it's certainly the egg cream is not overrated. The Brooklyn Dodgers certainly were not overrated. The fact that so many different movements came from Brooklyn: the women's movement, the gay rights movement, civil rights movement, union movement. All those people, all those movements, a lot of them came out of Brooklyn, and they certainly weren't overrated. The subway system is fabulous. I know that. I've been out to Coney Island and had the Nathan's hot dogs. That certainly isn't overrated. The beach is gorgeous out in Brighton Beach. That's a fun place. You go there and everybody speaks Russian. That's a very, very interesting. In fact, one of the people I interviewed in this book, his name is Alec Brook Krasny. Came from Moscow in 1992, learned English, and became a New York City councilman. I mean, it's when I'm talking about immigrants. These are people who, add such, great life to our country. Mm. That's why when I hear people talk about, these immigrants, they should go back to where they came from. Well, immigrants is what has made this country great. Mm. Who was here at the beginning was just the Indians. I mean, even the original Puritans, in a way, were immigrants. They weren't the first ones here. The Indians were here first. Well,
while you were mentioning things that were not overrated, I would have to say that you mentioned the hot dogs at Nathan's. I would say that the French fries at Nathan's cannot possibly be overrated.
Not overrated. That's correct.
They are the best.
And you know what else is very good? What else you can buy there? You can buy an ear of corn, which is, sopped in butter and is also fabulous. Really terrific.
Well, you didn't answer my question, but you gave us good information nonetheless. Hey, if you've got a question for writer Peter Golenbock, author of In the Country of Brooklyn, co-author of, well, I guess we would say he helped write An American Prince with Tony Curtis. We're going to talk about that in a minute, as well as
we were co-writers in a way.
Okay. Bums, Seven, the Mickey Mantle novel, Teammates, one of his most popular books among the middle school class.
And all the Yankee books, Bronx Zoo.
All the Yankee books. Give us a call, 646-595-3135. We're doing this in the middle of the day. Sometimes people are at work and listening but can't call in for fear of getting caught, so we understand that. Let's talk about Tony Curtis.
Okay.
Your other book that debuted today, American Prince, a memoir. How did the two of you get connected?
Boy, it was a long, circuitous route. I had done a proposal. An agent had called me. He had 3 rather famous rodeo cowboys that had entered the national championships about a bunch of years ago. And one of those 3 was one of the first black cowboys. It was a very interesting story. So I wrote that proposal, and it's not easy to sell the rodeo to the publishers in New York City, and so we didn't sell it.
Yeah.
So basically, I said to him, what other clients you got? And his answer was Tony Curtis. I said, great. I love Tony's movies. Why don't you set us up and let us write a book? And so he did that. And then it was a sort of a long. The Tony book. In terms of taking the amount of time to do it, that was probably the longest. This is really the longest book that it's taken me the time to do. In part because last December Tony got very sick. He got pneumonia, and it was touch and go there for a while. But fortunately, he recovered. I'm happy to say he recovered, and we got to finish that book, and it's out today. And Tony's going to be hopefully on the Leno show. I know he's going to be on The View, and also he's in addition he's going to be. I know he's going to go to London to do some PR over in London.
Now, I make my living working with people to tell their stories, but I'm kind of curious, in the case of Tony Curtis, what was the process? I mean, how did you work together, and how much time did you spend together, or by phone?
We spent a lot of time together, because his is the most incredible career. I mean, this is a guy who knew and worked with just about everybody. He came out to California about 1947, and the first gal who became a girlfriend was Marilyn Monroe. The very first one. That's not a bad start. And then, as his career blossomed, he made movies with so many of the other movie stars, men and women, Cary Grant, Burt Lancaster, so many of them. And there's just, stories and stories and stories and stories. Plus, he had 5 marriages. And certainly I felt that was the most important thing. I wanted to know more about Tony's personal life, even than I did about the movies that he made. And we spent a great deal of time talking about that. Somewhere along the line, I gave Tony a copy of my book, 7, because I felt that Tony's life and Mickey's life in some ways were parallel. Because both of them had been, the most popular people on the planet, and yet, to some extent, for both of them, no matter how famous, how successful they were, sort of in their own minds, it was never quite good enough, which is kind of sad in a way.
Yeah.
So I wanted Tony to see that in Mickey, and so we had a chance, to talk about some of the similarities in his life, and to great effect.
Did Tony know Mickey?
No. Oh, no, not at all.
No.
Well,
Well,
but I wanted him to see how interesting his own life could be. And he understood it immediately. And so one of the reasons I believe this book is going to be so successful is because this isn't one of those PR jobs. I mean, you're going to read about Tony's life, his real life.
What are some examples of that? That's what I wanted to ask you about. Was because these things do tend to be fluffed over a bit. Although I spoke to Kirk Douglas a couple of weeks ago and was looking back at the Ragman's Son in preparation for talking to him. I mean, he was pretty straightforward about the women and
he was. That's why Ragman's Son was so successful. He was.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it is that the agent who sold our book, that was Kirk Douglas's agent. Interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Tony and Kirk are good friends. But he's had 5 marriages. I mean, people will want to know, what happened. What happened to his marriage to Janet Leigh. And it's very detailed. They were married 10 years. It was fine for a couple of years. But then, you're doing movies with these beautiful women, and, she's doing movies with these handsome men, and things happen, if you know what I mean. And somewhere along the line, he found a letter to Janet from Bob Fosse, which really made him unhappy. And so, for the last 8 years of their marriage, they were doing what they could basically to stay married and to be civil. Mm-hmm. They had 2 kids. They had Kelly and Jamie Lee. But at a certain point, by the 10th year, basically their marriage was over. And what happened is he went to Argentina to do Taras Bulba with Yul Brynner. And the female star of that movie was a 17-year-old girl by the name of Christine Kaufman. And Tony and Christine fell in love. Tony was, 34, 35. Christine was 17. And the two of them fell in love. And so the whatever, it's not People magazine, but whatever those magazines were, movie magazines, teenage girl breaks up, marriage, Tony and, Janet marriage, that sort of thing. Janet was America's sweetheart. And here Tony was throwing her over for a 17-year-old. And what made it even worse, Christine's father had been, an officer in the SS. Christine was from Germany. Yeah. So, that was a very sort of tough time for him. Janet never forgave him, obviously. The 2 kids, and he, have never really been close because they were, younger than 10 when the divorce happened, and Janet never really spoke very well of him. So he's always been kind of estranged from those kids.
And
that's just one of the marriages.
Yeah, just one, right?
Yeah, that's just one of them. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's a very, you talk about a soap opera life. I mean, he's had an incredible soap opera life, and it's just fascinating.
Do we have any? Your 7, the Mickey Mantle novel, had some good Marilyn Monroe stuff. Do we have any new Marilyn Monroe material to add to the?
A lot of wonderful new. There's a whole chapter on his relationship with her when they met, when they were both young and up and coming. And then one of my favorite chapters has to do with the making of Some Like It Hot, where she and Jack Lemmon and he were the stars of that fabulous, fabulous movie. And he tells us, incredible story about the love scene that they were making, on the boat. And the interesting nature of making that movie, because she was a real head case at the time, and very, very difficult, and very, very unhappy. She didn't live a heck of a lot much longer than that. But they sort of rekindled for that scene the love they had when they were kids, younger. And he tells in great detail. It's a kind of erotic, very interesting scene.
Well, you're getting used to writing erotic scenes for Marilyn.
Well, it's an incredible coincidence. It really is. It really is amazing. But the thing about doing this business, you start talking to somebody, you just never know quite what you're going to hear.
Right. Now, did you interview any of Tony's friends for the book, or was it strictly based on his?
No,
okay.
This is his memoir. This is his story. I mean, I must have 35 hours of tape.
Wow.
I mean, this book could have been another 100 pages longer. Fortunately, I have an editor with a very deft touch. She did a very fine job. Yeah. Shay Earhart, her name is, and she did a tremendous job editing this book.
All right. Well, as we go into the last segment of the show, let's talk about the book that you're finishing this week, George.
Okay.
And you'll have to repeat the subtitle. That was a good one, and I didn't write it all down.
The little rich boy who built the Yankee Empire.
I imagine there were a lot of people who had stories to tell you for that book.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And this book has an interesting history. This is the book that's taken me the longest to write. This book has taken me, well, let's put it this way. I started this book in 1981. So where are we now? 2008? So do the math. How many years is that? Is that 27?
Yep.
Okay, this book is 27 years in the making. And what happened in 1981, I had a contract to do a book with Crown, to do a book on Steinbrenner. And at the same time, unbeknownst to me, there were two other writers, Ed Lynn and Dick Schaap, who also had contracts to write books on Steinbrenner. I had interviewed, 65 or 70 people who knew him. Classmates at high school, at Culver, classmates at Williams College, people who were with him at Lockbourne Air Force Base, people who played basketball for him when he owned the Cleveland Pipers in 1961 and 62, the people who prosecuted him at Watergate. I mean, I interviewed everybody for this book. And then the contract provided for me to give the book in after 1 year of signing the contract. Well, the Lynn book and the Schaap book were handed in. And I wasn't even, I probably had another 6 months more work. And so they canceled my contract. Oh. But I had all this fabulous material. And so last year, when I signed a contract to write a book about George with John Wiley and Sons, I had a head start. I had a big head start.
Right. And so much has happened since then, obviously.
So much has happened, and you'll be fascinated to see the people I interviewed for the last 27 years. It's quite a story.
Wow.
Quite a story.
Were you able to talk to Tom McEwen?
No, I didn't talk to Tom McEwen. I interviewed the mayor of Tampa, Dick Greco. Because one of the things I wanted to let people know was just how charitable George's works were over the years. And he certainly was. So Greco is the last person in this book who I interviewed who had, firsthand knowledge of a lot of the, important charitable things George had done in Tampa.
Mm. When is the book due to be published?
May 4th.
Wow.
May 4th, 2009.
Quite a year for you. 2 books today, another book in May. I mean, how fast do you work?
Damned if I know. I don't know. I just work. I wake up in the morning, I have breakfast, I start work at 9 o'clock, and I work till 4 o'clock, 4:30. I just work.
Okay. Well, let's finish up by returning to the subject of your entry into the world of fiction, 7, the Mickey Mantle novel. When we did our first interview last year for Mr. Media, that book was just on the verge of release, and I think I had read a Bound Galley, but it was not final. I found it a real fun, entertaining read, but I know you got hammered for it, and I wondered if that experience had changed you at all.
Nah, the conservatives hammered me. I got hammered by the New York Post, and I got hammered by the Daily News. I got a wonderful review in the New York Times. I got one of the best reviews I ever had for a book in the New York Times. Richard Sandomir was very, very, positive, and could never thank him enough for it. But I mean, sex is a funny business, and when you're talking about, one of the great American icons in an era where, George Bush is as clamps down on the press as hard as he can, along with, Rupert Murdoch and other conservatives, you run the risk of taking a pounding. And sure enough, I took a pounding.
Anything you would have done differently in retrospect?
No, nothing differently. That was the story. I mean, the funny thing about that book is that's the closest thing to his real life as anything you'll ever read.
Right. Would you ever write in that? The people who knew him the most knew exactly that I was right on the money. They knew this was a guy, and they loved Mickey for it. I mean the prudes and all said, "Oh, how can you write such terrible things about him?" Well, I mean, they weren't so terrible. First of all, sex is not terrible, and this was the guy's life. I mean, really, what the book was about was his regrets. I mean, that's really what it came down to at the end. How he felt that despite all that he had done, he could have been better. He could have been much better. So we really feel for him. He had such demons. He was an abused child, and he never quite felt that anything he ever did was good enough. That's a hard way to live your life. Peter, do you think you'd ever write anything in that format again? That near, almost veritas, but not quite?
It's possible. It's certainly possible. I thought it was very effective. I mean, part of why I couldn't write it as nonfiction was that the people who had told me a lot of those stories were no longer with us. I mean, a lot of those stories were told to me by Mickey and Billy Martin, and they had passed away. It's hard to imagine. I mean, I knew the two of them so well. It's hard to imagine that there was somebody else that I would do a book like that, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out. Okay. I thought it was a very worthwhile attempt.
Did the reaction to that book among sports writers or journalists or athletes, did any of that cost you any friendships, any old friendships?
I'm sort of a lone wolf anyway. I don't belong to anybody's club. I'm not a member of any writers association. I'm not, I don't get a vote for the Hall of Fame. So I don't have the slightest idea whether it cost me anything. I don't know. Okay. I hope not. I hope it didn't.
Me too.
Thanks.
Well, I like you.
Thank you.
I don't know what that'll buy you, but I like you. I always have.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, folks, listen. Check out writer Peter Golenbock's two new books, In the Country of Brooklyn and American Prince, a memoir, the autobiography that he helped legendary actor Tony Curtis pen. And next May, watch out for George, his biography of George Steinbrenner.
Right. Also, let me add. Yeah, let me just say on my website. Yeah, well, no, I just want to say on my website, which is golenbockbooks.com, there were 10 chapters my editor took out of In the Country of Brooklyn. It just was too long. I mean, you were asking about length. I have 10 more chapters in addition to what's in this book. And so I put them on the website. I mean, 10 very, very interesting chapters that are not in the book. And so I invite, anybody who's listening to go to golenbockbooks.com and, read the 10 extra chapters as well. They're just interesting people who had very interest. Yep, that's a bonus for you.
Very good. Well, and of course, both of those new books are available at fine bookstores everywhere, as well as Amazon.com and MrMedia.com. Peter, always a pleasure. Always enjoy talking to you, whether it's for everyone's consumption or just chatting. But thanks so much for coming on the show again today.
The pleasure is mine, Bob. I always appreciate you. You do wonderful work. Thanks.
Good luck with the new ones, and maybe we'll talk in May when George comes out.
That would be great. Thanks.
All right. Take care, Peter. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
So for dozens more celebrity and media newsmaker interviews, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my earlier conversations with Billy Bob Thornton, Cheryl Hines, Jeff Garland, Robert Schimmel, Bruce Davison, and Kirk Douglas, among many others. And please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen to the show on Blog Talk Radio, digitaljournal.com, Podcast Pickle, Vox, Folio, Mediafly, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencast, Odeo, the Kindle Reader, or iTunes. If you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@andelman, ANDELMAN.com. Everybody, thanks so much for listening today. I always appreciate when you take some time out of your day and spend a little bit with us.